Hello, hello, good afternoon. Welcome to our panel on the legacy of righteous anger with the Black Femme Supremacy Film Festival. My name is Hannah, Hannah Moore. I'm from the Bay Area, California, and I'm here today with some powerful artists, activists, filmmakers. I'm excited to have a conversation about this, the legacy of righteous anger, right? Understanding a legacy of anger and what it means to suppress that for Black femmes and through their art and film. So first, before we jump in, I have to acknowledge the land. As settlers of Rhode Island, occupying this land that was not originally ours, it's always important to recognize and honor the folks that cared for, prayed over, took care of this land long before we came. So I need to lift up the Piscataway, Lumbee, and Cherokee peoples. We organize, the Black Femme Supremacy Film Festival organizes on ancestral homeland of Piscataway people, which is present-day Baltimore, right? So we wish to pay our respects to the elders, past and present, civil citizens, the Cedarville of Piscataway, Conaway, and Piscataway Indian Nation. I also want to lift up, because I am here in California, in the Bay Area, the Ohlone people, because I am here on occupied Ohlone land. Great, so we will go ahead and get in. So we have 4 films that you all were able to see. Keep Your Flowers, directed by Sekou Browne. Sweet Rind, directed by Wynter. Omi, directed by Vatora Godwin, Rising Power, Building an Intersectional Justice Movement in the United States. Profiling M. Adams, directed by Sharmeen, Obaid-Chinoy. So I'm gonna go ahead and kick us off with questions that are open to all of the panelists. Just let me know who feels moved to speak first, but I just wanted to start because we're talking about legacies, right? Legacies, tradition, things that are passed on to us from our ancestors, from the folks that came before us. So thinking about that and gifts that were given, what are what is the legacy or the gift that your film is offering to generations to come after us? And I'm gonna shoot that one to M. Adams.
Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for having me on the panel. And I'm excited to be on the panel and also to listen and learn from the panelists. But I would say one of the contributions I hope that the film I'm in makes is an opportunity for people to see themselves reflected. I think, I didn't grow up with seeing a lot of people who were like me, meaning seeing a lot of people who were gender nonconforming or seeing folks who were transmasculine. And so when I think about people who I think of as leaders of our liberation movement, and there are many incredible ones. I mean, tons of Black women we don't know enough about, the Black women who have just done such incredible organizing work to help get us to this point. Um, Even amongst that, we don't see a lot of Black GNC people. And so what I hope this film can do and offer as part of the legacy or be part of the tapestry of the radical Black tradition is the work that Black GNC, Black trans, Black genderqueer, et cetera, folks are doing. And so I hope that this film provides an opportunity for people who are Black women and girls, who are Black GNC, all of us, these such juicy Black genders, to see themselves reflected inside of the film.
Cool, thank you, thank you. And I just realized I did not speak on your bios, which I want to do because I asked y'all and I want to make sure I do acknowledge y'all. So real quick before I get back to the questions. So Keep Your Flowers, Sekou by Sekou Browne. Sekou Browne is a filmmaker based in Houston, Texas. Along with his wife, Sekou runs a wedding and lifestyle photography company part-time and has worked as a writer and production assistant with local independent film productions in Houston. Photographing love stories in his business has been the foundation for him, fine-tuning a keen ability to capture intimate and emotional moments in films. So after working as a crew member on several short films, this film is his directorial debut. Currently, he is working on several short and feature film projects and is set to serve as DP and first AD on a short film, Inherited, which he also wrote. His main goal is to write, direct, and produce meaningful narrative and documentary films that intersect both his Christian faith and race. Cool. And then Sweet Rind. So Sweet Rind, written by Clinton Roach, who is a proud Jamaican whose birthplace is in a cool rural setting of St. Mary, the parish that also produced the likes of world-renowned artists of Barry Hammond, Capleton, Tanya Stevens, and comedian Oliver Samuel. He prefers to be classified as an observational storyteller rather than a classic writer, an ode to childhood moments spent listening to stories told by community elders who would visit his home during the evenings. Unquestionably, these formed some of his favorite memories growing up, rivaled only by carefree days spent bush cooking with friends, playing sports, and nights spent sky gazing. As a teenager, Clinton cherished Saturdays, dreaded Sundays, and worked feverishly on Mondays to Fridays, usually failed attempts to avoid chores. While his first love is storytelling, his curiosity and imagination led him to study the engineering sciences in Ontario, Canada, and his underlying love of politics and economics further pushed him to obtain his Master's of Business Administration from Edinburgh, Scotland. As a bright-eyed graduate, writing was the furthest thing from his mind. However, things changed when his employment afforded him the incredible opportunity to visit diverse places across the world, his favorite being South Africa, home of his hero Nelson Mandela. There, the fascinating and provocative interrelationship of politics, religion, science, socioeconomics, and the arts were on full display and had him in awe. These inseparable forces have inspired human stories that he feels have to be told from his perspective. The movie Sweet Rind is Clinton's first published literary work. In the pipeline are other soon-to-be published stories, including a book of poetry, Okay, Now Where To, and movies My Father's House, Pompey's Night, The Honeybee Diaries, and Lilac Wine. And we have the other film, Omi, by Vatora Godwin. And Vatora says, as a first-time director and producer, she learned so much in this process. She was very lucky to have Dante Thomas, director from Marshawn Lynch's Beast Mode Productions, to help produce this project, which was tremendously helpful. And we have, last but definitely not least, M. Adams, who just spoke, Rising in Power. So M. Adams is a community organizer. You may have caught wind to that as they were speaking. A co-executive director of Freedom Inc., born and raised in Milwaukee. Adams has been in Madison since 2003. Adams' dad has been incarcerated most of her life, and she comes from a community that has been the extremes target of police violence. And in March 2016, Adams' mother transitioned after fighting cancer and many forms of violence. Adams is also a dad and sees her family as primary motivation for her work. As a queer Black person, Adams has developed and advocated for a strong intersectional approach in numerous important venues. Adams is a leading figure in the movement for Black lives and Take Back the Land movement. She presented before the United Nations for the Convention Eliminating Racial Discrimination. She is a co-author of Forward from Ferguson and a paper on Black community control over police. She is author to Intersectionality Theory in Why Killing Unarmed Black Folks is a Queer Issue. Adams can regularly be seen in person, on TV, or in newspapers, giving presentations, testifying at city council meetings, and energizing crowds at protests. And you look so familiar. Have you been to Brazil? I was trying to place where I recognize you. And maybe you have, were you at the AWID feminist conference in Bahia about, okay, cool. I was like, where have I seen you? Okay, cool. Lots of full circle moments with this festival. And then we have also here Michaela, pronounced correct? Michaela, yes. Michaela, I'm so sorry. Michaela, who was a story advisor for the for Rising in Power. And she is a researcher, storyteller, and cultural strategist. She partners with artists and activists and philanthropy to advance social and cultural change for and with Black and Brown communities. She has designed participatory action research, stakeholder engagement processes, messaging research, and story-based projects in the United States, East and Central Africa, and in Western Europe. Most recently, she has supported activists in Kenya to develop new narratives and messaging to advance LGBTI rights. And in the United States, she has engaged in a multi-year collaboration with performing artists, filmmakers, and composers called the Spiritual Technology Project. The project explores Black church music and other Black cultural artifacts in the American South. She's a mother of a young son and currently based in Oakland, California. Yes, Oakland. Cool. Okay, thank y'all for letting me go back to that. Now, so back to the questions. Would anyone else like to share what gift or legacy they hope that their film is offering for generations to come? Let's see. I'm going
in answer to that question, or film, the legacy. This is interesting. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. It's a little delayed.
I apologize for that. With Sweet Rind, we the issue of legacy. We hope that the film will actually remind us of the legacy from the past of resistance and
I'm having trouble hearing.
As Black and Caribbean people, answer, but the legacy of resistance and rebellion.
The legacy of resistance and rebellion. Thank you. The little lag, but that got cool. And let's see. Vatora.
That's right.
Yeah. So, what legacy or gift are you hoping that Omi is offering up to generations coming after us?
Omi was a labor of love. It was our first project, and it was very important for us to represent a woman's full emotion on screen. It's a very interesting panel that we're a part of because it's righteous anger, and how I define righteous anger is knowing when your boundaries have been crossed. And I feel like, in this film, her boundaries were absolutely crossed, and she had to figure out what was important to her, and she had to make a decision that was going to reflect her wholeness as a person. And so when we did this film, there was a lot of women that we knew that related very much to this topic. And so I'm hoping that when you see Omi, you understand that a woman there's a journey that a woman goes through when she's dealing with pain. And when that woman is enduring that pain, it may take a while for her to get to the other side of the tunnel. But I'm hoping that a woman walks away feeling empowered to make decisions for herself, and also feels like she is in control of knowing when to set boundaries. So I would hope that's a legacy for Omi.
Thank you. And Ivory, can you speak to the legacy you're hoping that's gifted through your flowers? And you wrote the poem, correct? The film.
Yeah. Yes. I wrote the poem "Keep Your Flowers," and I was the actress in the film. So I wrote the poem, and I was the one in the film. So for me, when I wrote the poem, I think it was when when Philandro Castile died, that's when I wrote the poem. So it was a few years back that I wrote the poem. And I remember feeling anger, but also realizing that I felt a lot of trauma. I was sitting at work and I wasn't able to work. And I realized, I'm like, I feel like I'm in an abusive relationship with my country. A relationship that is not lending me a voice. And when I try to speak up, I'm getting pushback. You know, I'm not being understood. I'm actually getting abused more for speaking up. And so that's when I wrote the poem. And then after the George Floyd incident happened, I just felt like I had to get that out, that message out. And that's when we made the film. So the legacy of what I want to take away from it is sometimes, you know, we are comfortable in the anger and the defiance of it all, but not comfortable saying this is traumatic, you know? So I want the legacy to be like that. We don't have to always seem so strong, because there's a lot of trauma with being African-American in this country, a lot of passed down trauma. It can kind of be like being in an abusive relationship. And so I hope that the film expresses that we can actually express all of those different emotions when we're going through what it means being African-American in this country.
Wow. So moving on to the next one, thinking about righteousness, or what it means to be righteous, right? Or morally right, or justifiable, or virtuous, right? Grounded in principles and morals. So I was curious what y'all's thoughts are about the relationship with like virtue and anger or rage, being virtuous and anger. Let's see. Does anyone feel? I mean, you spoke to this. You just spoke to this a little bit, Ivory. But I'm curious what others' thoughts are around the relationship with virtue and anger.
Can I take a crack at this? But I'm sorry for my connection. But in our film, the protagonist, Elsie, because of virtue, her family was killed by this notorious killer. But because of her virtue, it allowed her not to take and act the same, like very harsh revenge against him. Okay, even though she was angry because of what happened, she took her anger to a particular point, but it did not spill over to basically have blood on her hands, so to speak. Right. So there's a thin line. The virtue allows us to not enact violence, for example, even though we were actually wronged, right? Just like in the civil rights movement, there's a peaceful protest. We were angry, but we took it to a particular point, but it did not spill over to, let's say, actually open violence, right? And so our protagonist, she took it to that level and brought it back, right? Now the antagonist is one who virtue wasn't present, so to speak. They did not adhere to that, to those kind of rules. So he took it to an extreme level. Right, so that was our perspective.
I know at the end of Sweet Rind, I was like, she didn't kill him? What? She should have killed him. And I was like, I guess I had to reflect.
So that's the thing. She had a rage, right? It was a control rage. So, but she was angry. Think about it, right? You've lost your pretty much your entire family, and you've caught the person, right? So the question is, do you just kill him? Well, she didn't. So just like a mother, right? She captures him, but she has to. She went through the process of teaching, right? Showing the history. You notice that she had a quilt. Now the quilt was actually very symbolic for her. As long as she had it in her hand, she was more subdued. So she was pretty much brought back from the brink, right? So the quilt is very symbolic. The colors are very symbolic, and it's actually showing her kind of mending the pieces as to what ails us as a society. So things are pretty much kind of falling apart. And she's trying to show that, yes, we can actually mend this without further, destroying ourselves. So that was the symbolism for of the quilt. But yeah, she had a lot of rage. kill him.
Great.
I think there's, I was just going to say that I think there's something for our film that is, that I sort of feel like I have two things to say, right? One is about like my own history, just to kind of date myself, I guess, is that I'm a 90s baby. And so I grew up kind of in this, in a fairly white environment. I grew up in Seattle. And I think really inherited something from my family. My dad is first generation in this country. My mom's queer, of needing to assimilate in some way in order to access power, in order to sort of, progress in this sort of American story that we've told ourselves. And so I actually see in my work an importance to show rage, to show rage as it's happening, rather than sort of retrospectively looking back and saying, oh, we accomplished this amazing change, and isn't it nice that we were able to do this in a nonviolent way, or in a quiet way. It's something that I'm really appreciating about this moment in particular, is how vocal and how loud the movement has become, and in particular young people and queer people kind of are being elevated in this moment, in this full moment of showing our rage and showing our anger. I feel like when I think about, when I think about representation in film and storytelling in general of Black and Brown people, there's a value that's placed on handling things in a certain way and containing ourselves and keeping going. And I feel very committed at this moment to actually showing the disruption that can be caused by rage, and how that leads to other conversations, how it can be a gateway, how it can be a catalyst.
Thank you.
I think that this is such an important question for a number of reasons. One of the things that I think is most perverted about white supremacy, about patriarchy, about capitalism, side of the value sets that accompany them, is this unfair, uneven definition of morale. So if you are a benefactor of those systems, if you're white supremacist, patriarchal, capitalist, and you benefit from systems in any way, the kind of violence you do to people or to the environment, or the spiritual violence that you're doing, is not read as violence. So when policymakers who are protecting the white American empire make policies that extract and exploit Black bodies, that harm Black people and Black life, that's not seen as violent. That's sort of seen as everyday work and business, and you're just keeping things functioning. You're just keeping the machine going. That's not seen as violent. But if you are the Black body, if you are the Black person, the Black spirit that is being exploited, and you respond to the hurt done or the harm done to you, that hurt, with fire. And that's how I like to understand rage, right? And anger, is they say that those are secondary emotions, that first came the pain, first came hurt, and then after that, you go into anger or other forms of emotion. So if you respond to the hurt, to the harm done to you, that pain, with fire, I actually think that's a sign of intelligence, right? And this is something that Malcolm X would talk about. He would say that is a sign of intelligence if a person recognizes that that as a Black person, that you have a self worthy of defense. That if somebody comes to kill you, if you think you should protect yourself, if you have enough value and you protect yourself, that's a sign of intelligence. That in fact, right, that society would be telling you you're more intelligent if you just allow people to kill you, but that's not more intelligent. Saying that you get to just slap me, shoot me, beat me, sick dogs on me, and I'll allow it, it's not more intelligent than saying you better get that dog off me. So I like to situate it in that context, because too often when we talk about morals and virtue, it really is coming out of, I think, a white neoliberal patriarchal context. And so let me ground this a little bit. So a lot of the work that I do is actually with survivors of gender-based violence. So the majority of the people I work with are women and girls and LGBTQ survivors of sexual violence, violence by partners, violence by families, or violence that people have experienced as children. And those survivors are told all the time that they should not respond with fire to the things done with them, right? So we have children, 7-year-olds, 8-year-olds, who are told that, what happened to you, keep it hush. What happened to you, don't be mad about it. Something God or another that that some divine order or purpose is the reason for your suffering. And as a radical Black queer feminist, I reject that. I think that we should be, as people who have selves worthy of defense, we should be angry. We should, and it is a righteous anger. We should be called to fire, using fire in our defense. We should be using everything that we have to get those things off of us and to render those things obsolete. And so when I think of this question about what's the relationship, I'm like, I cannot think of a time where Black people, since the invention of white supremacy, I cannot think of a time where progress has been made by Black people without an accompanying rage. I just cannot. I cannot name a movement, including the civil rights movement. I cannot name any movement historically or currently that has been brought upon, that has come to pass without there also being in anger, without there being a rage. And if you are not outraged at the condition of Black people, then frankly, you're not paying attention. And so I think it is a necessary fuel to the fire. Stop there.
Ashe, thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Does anyone else want to add to this, this relationship with virtue and rage? That was a great breakdown. I really appreciate that. And just really understanding like what we understand as virtue and moral, where that's coming from, right? And when folks say like, and just all of the ways that religion and patriarchy are so intertwined in our oppression. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and move to the next question then. So this has kind of been spoke to, but all of these films accept and bask in anger, pain, and justice instead of avoiding it, right? And so Adams just spoke to this, right? Not avoiding the rage and anger that comes from the violence we experience, right? So how important is it for you to represent Black femmes expressing themselves unapologetically? And let's go to Vatora. We haven't heard from in a little bit. Omi.
Yeah, so Omi is very much it's an interesting question for this film. When we put together Omi, and Taya can speak to this as well, but we were very intentional about the main character Omi basking in this pain, the situation that she's in. It's about a woman who's married to someone, and there is a tape, an infamous tape that we don't know what's on the tape, but she saw the tape. It's causing some friction in her relationship. And then there's a temptress that comes in, and there's a little bit of a twist because she very much throughout the whole film, there is an absence of anger. So there is no real emotion. And I think that's a little bit of trauma, a little bit of depression that sits in. We tried as much as we could to reflect that in how we shot it. So color was very important. The reason we shot blue, the reason we shot that her soaking in the bathtub, there was blue sprinkled in everything. There was a very cold energy, cold feel throughout the whole film because they were not communicating. It's a very quiet film. And what I love about it is opposite from one of my favorite films, which is Waiting to Exhale, that scene where Bernadine burned down that car, we saw very much how anger and rage on film is very powerful. We saw her dragging down the clothes in her kids' toys. We saw her speaking to herself in the closet. All of the things that she was dealing with in that whole relationship, we saw unfold in that whole scene, which to me was the most powerful part of the whole scene. And Omi was very opposite of that. She could not find her anger. She could not find the emotion that she needed to make a decision to change the situation, to address what was on the tape. And that was intentional. And so it took something else. It took another man, or it took another tempting situation to probe her, to address her husband and say, this is the decision that I'm making. And so I think Omi, and the reason we called it Omi was because this was very much about her journey and how she dealt with the situation. But there's so many women that they feel like they have to be strong. They feel like they have to stay in situations that don't serve them. They feel like they have to, they feel like they have to fix everything. When Black women, we carry the burden of always wanting to be the superhero in the family, where we're protecting our spouses, our children, our mental health. And it had a tremendous effect on her even showing up as her true self. And so I wanted to very much show why that's important. Like, why is it that women, they settle, they stay in situations that don't serve them, and in the end, they become another form or a half form of themselves, and how unproductive that is. And so it's very much a journey from the moment that she wakes up to the moment that she has dinner with her husband. That was a full journey of her coming to a conclusion that we wanted to show. And like I mentioned before, it very much is about her boundaries being crossed, and she needed to stand up for herself, and she did.
Thank you. Taya, did you want to add anything about that?
I think Vatora covered it. Just as a woman, I could relate to it. You said that dating you, being a 90s baby, I'm actually a 70s baby. So I've seen a lot of women have to deal with things in that manner. Just be quiet, deal with what comes your way, take care of your family, take care of everybody else, and not really take care of yourself. So I could relate to what Omi had to deal with as a character and as a woman.
Could I, a male perspective? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Personally, based on my observation, in general, I believe I know the Black woman actually represents our collective conscience. She's our collective soul, basically, and where she goes, we go, right? And as I mentioned earlier, she's also a mother as well. And I think in our film, she's basically the person who's going to fix this for us, actually. So in essence, she's almost like a savior, right? I believe personally, if the world was actually run by women, basically, we'd actually be in a much better place. She provides so much more. Like we say in our film, she's angry because she has to face reality, but at the end of the day, she makes the right decisions. Okay.
Thank you. Ivory, would you like to speak to that? I mean, you did,
Yeah.
In terms of like your process.
Yeah.
Poem, but,
Yeah, I was gonna say the actual title, like Keep Your Flowers, because I think so many times Black women, we go through things that are extremely painful, and we're expected to be so strong. So even if we get upset, right, there's a time limit on how long that we can be upset. There's a time where people are ready to say, okay, now it's time to make amends. Now it's time to see how we're going to patch this thing all up again and make good and make happy. And so even the title of the poem in the film, Keep Your Flowers, is this time there is no time limit on this anger, this pain. Like there's not going to be any let's make up and make happy again. You can keep your flowers this time. And so I think it's so important that Black women feel empowered to stay righteously angry as long as needed. Because you want me to take these flowers and make up, but nothing's changed. Nothing's changed about the situation. But okay, I gave you okay, the George Floyd thing happened. Well, we gave you a month to be angry, right? After about a month, everybody's like, oh, okay, well, the anger is out of control. Well, it wasn't out of control when it first happened, but we're always on a time limit. We're on a time limit of how long we can be angry. And so I think it's important to know we can keep that righteous anger. You know, I'm not like just out of control anger for the whole world, but there is righteous anger that you should keep until things change. And I think Black women haven't been given, well, we don't need permission for it, but we're waiting for permission to keep that anger, right? And so we need to know we don't need permission until things change and get the way we need them to be. That's the only way we're actually even going to be heard. People want you to stop being angry so they can stop listening. People want you to stop being angry so they can go back to their regularly scheduled programming, right? Like, it's because now you're dismissible when you're not angry anymore. Now I can ignore you because you're not angry anymore. So I think it's very important that we can keep that righteous anger until we get the change that we're seeking. That's it.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. I feel like that, I mean, obviously that's something I'm moving through in my own process, but yes, thank you for reminding me for the permission to do that. So moving into the next question, and this has also been touched on, but just the program, right, Black Femme Supremacy Film Festival has been bookended with 2 films about the same liberation movement in different climates. So how has 2020 evolved or hindered the discussion on justice? I'm gonna go ahead and, there you go.
Okay, I think it's after further discussion. I think we're at an inflection point currently where we actually looking at a lot of symptoms, addressing a lot of symptoms, but it's important for us to carry the discussion forward in terms of real root causes, because there are actually more than one root cause. So once we've found the root causes, we have we implement proper corrective actions that we can actually check to make sure they're actually working, right? Not just throw money at problems without fully actually addressing root causes. So yeah, the symptoms are here. So look at what caused the issues in the first place and make the tough decisions through policies, implement tough policies. Sometimes might be uncomfortable for a little while, but in the end, we'll get the results. So you implement the policies and you make sure they're actually sustained, right? If a particular policy isn't working, we'll make our changes and move forward, okay? But yes, we're at a point right now where we, at least the dialogue is actually open, and we have people of all races, creeds, and class actually participating, which is good. So we should continue the discussion, move forward, and hold people to account, the halls of Congress or the halls of power to account, right? Not just lip service. It's very ironic that now that things are out in the open, people are actually behaving well. Like cooperatives are behaving well. For instance, look at a particular NFL team. For many, many years, people are saying your name is actually, change your name, and they resist it, right? But now that everything's out in the open, everyone's actually acting good. So we have to make sure that this is actually sustained and it's not a reactionary thing that we're doing.
Cool, thank you. I'm curious to hear what M. Adams, what do you think about if 2020, how 2020 has evolved or hindered the discussion on justice?
You know, I think we're I think this moment is historic. I think the COVID-19 pandemic, which is quite frankly killing Black folks in the United States, in a country that more than has the amount of resources needed to prevent it from being a pandemic, the pandemic that it is. I also think the fact that we've had and still are inside of a 50-state rebellion. I think I read somewhere maybe it was New York, something like an estimated 50 to 60 million people have taken some form of action since the murder of George Floyd in this recent uprising. And also, I think some connections are being made for the everyday person in a way that it wasn't even 2014 when another urban rebellion took place in Ferguson and went around the country. So some examples of that is I think people are talking more about women and girls in ways that it was sort of difficult to do in 2014. Like I think people still were not naming the harm that women and girls were facing by police. I think now more people are talking about Black transgender, Black GNC people, Black LGBTQI people, and the violence that we experience as part of the state violence that we've been naming. And I also just think some things are pointed out. Like I think the fact that Black people can't get a ventilator, but they got a tank. And here comes the tank and the army marching down your street, or you can't get a job, but the corporations got bailed out again, and Jeff Bezos is fine, or the climate disasters are happening, storms are happening, mass evictions are on the frontier here. Yet, Trump and his rich friends they're doing fine. So I think there's just so many contradictions at this moment. And the average person who is not already connected to a political organization is making those connections on their own. I just think it's an incredible leap from even 5 years ago. So in that sense, I think we're further ahead. And like the last panelist mentioned, the amount of action, right? People have been in the streets, people have been challenging, people have been directly confronting those in power, and people are even challenging people who look like them, but that don't have a politic that's based in or steeped in liberation for Black folks. So not only challenging white folks and non-Black people to get it right by us, but it's also challenging other Black liberals to get it right by us. It is saying that, look, what we want is access, we want autonomy, we want power, and we want to pretty much, govern ourselves for ourselves, and we have the answers to what we need. And so I think this is an incredible time. This is a historic time, and I think it's on us to not fail in this moment. And so we got to keep it going.
Ashe, thank you. Cool. So now we are going to open it up to questions from the audience, that folks who have been listening in. Let's see. So the first one, out of what I consider my own righteous anger about it, I asked Julie Dash regarding Daughters of the Dust, how she dealt with not getting the same opportunities and access to resources as other filmmakers who'd received the same acclaim. She said she didn't just focus on that she did not focus on that and just continued to work. Also that she had experienced more doubt from the film industry as a woman than as a Black person. As the next gen of filmmakers and as folks who have a variety of gender identities, do you feel this is, and let's see, it looks like it got cut off at the end, but all right, do you feel this is, do you feel that? Does that make sense? Let's see if I can read that question again. Okay. So Julie Dash felt more, she experienced more doubt from the film industry as a woman than as a Black person. So as the next generation of filmmakers and of folks of a variety of gender identities, do you feel this? Or what do you feel like? Do you identify with this? Does this resonate with you? Are folks understanding the question or, okay. Taya or Vatora?
It was a long question, so I'm trying to dissect it. I'll speak from just being sort of a first-time director, filmmaker in this space. I grew up watching, some of my favorite shows were Different World, who obviously was directed by Debbie Allen. You have huge filmmakers in the space right now, which are Black women like Ava DuVernay. You have Issa Rae. There's a lot of women behind the scenes that are doing great things, but there's not enough of them. In the film space, because I'm so new to it, I can say that it's few and far between for me. I don't see a lot of young Black women directors, and so I think it's a space just like any other space and any other industry. There's not enough Black women represented. I can speak to that. I work in technology, and so it's the same. In a lot of industries, it's mirrored the same. There's a few that are doing great things and they're opening doors for the next generation of filmmakers to come behind, but there always needs to be more. So really, when we decided to do this film, we worked with what we had. We knew people that could help us get this produced. They weren't all women, some of them were men, but I think it's important as filmmakers to come together and find community, build community with each other, because it's not an easy thing to do. Film itself is a very hard medium because it requires money. And you spend a lot of time on set. You spend a lot of time editing. And so it's not the easiest industry to break into at all. And so if you want to become a filmmaker and you want to just kind of jump in and do it, and let's say you don't have any experience, technology today is a little bit more easier in that space where people can use different cameras and their phones to make great films. We see it all the time if we scroll through Instagram, little mini films, but it's a hard thing to do. And so I think, to answer the question, I feel like there is always an absence of, I think we're still fighting this battle of creating a space for women in all industries, but especially in filmmaking. And I think it's up to us, the platforms like this, to talk about films that are being made by young women filmmakers of all genders and of all races. And, and that's a part of the reason why I feel like it's important to community around film festivals like these. I hope that answers the question.
Yes, it did. Did you want to answer that?
I was just going to say, just from another angle on that. So the film that Em participated in is part of a five part. So it's 5 episodes of a film project called Fundamental, and sort of the premise of the film series is to expose and tell stories about women or GNC folks that are leading movements around different types of supremacies in different parts of the world. And I think, so from my perspective, in this capacity, I worked with Global Fund for Women, which funded the series and was the executive producer. And I think there's advocacy that's happening now that's interesting around sort of what investments can be made in order to elevate different voices, and specifically women and Black women's voices, sort of on the back end. That's interesting. So I feel like there's been a public conversation, and it continues to increase content creators, whether they be directors or writers or actors as storytellers. But I think there's another conversation that's about who's investing in storytelling, and how we sort of help to frame, for example, the story around this Fundamental series that's specifically looking at feminism, right? How we help to shift the lens by which organizations or funders that have typically been invested in women's issues, how we start to sort of shift their focus and their frame so that they're able to see both the benefit and the importance of telling a more dynamic experience of being femme or being GNC in this country.
Yeah, no, definitely.
I hope that
Thank
helps.
you for lifting that up. There's so many layers to it. Okay, so it looks like we have another question from the audience. So what was the motivation for choosing this story to channel your message for discussion? So what was the motivation for each of you behind producing this particular story?
In my case, a couple things actually triggered the decision. First and foremost, I'm actually very concerned about the state of things in Jamaica, for example, with the
froze up, Clinton.
I want to scout. Hold. Sorry, am I back? Okay. Can
You're
you guys
coming
hear
in.
me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I'll keep it short. But one of the moments was actually when I actually realized that the diaspora, we're in the diaspora in the Caribbean, for example. We share similar history to folks, for example, in Latin America. So one of the moments that I actually triggered the thing was when I was on the Strip and I went to a museum and I realized that Maroons in Suriname had the same behavior, the same tactics as Maroons in Jamaica. See, I was thinking all along that Maroons were only in Jamaica, but I actually realized then that, oh, hold on, they speak a different, African folks in Colombia, in South America, the history is the same. We're from the same people. So that's when it occurred to me that, you know what, language and geography sometimes separate us, and we refer to others as the other, for example, right? When we're the same people. And so I started thinking, and then the final thing was when I learned about the Abeng. You saw the movie, you saw her mention the Abeng, which was a symbol back then that slaves used to use to warn of the encroachments of the slave owners, right? So the slaves would actually run away because Maroons did not want to be enslaved. So we always resisted. We were always trying to get away. So when we got away, and that, they're coming, so be prepared. But that was used then for that. Now, the modern day Abeng in the story, we talk about the cell phone being used as a modern day Abeng to destroy us, right? So hence the symbolism. So that's what, so I finally, like I say, I got all the story, and I was thinking all along, but when I saw those two things, the Abeng, or learned of the Abeng and the Maroons, that gave me more motivation to finish the story. So that's my motivation.
So, Vatora?
Hi, it's Ivory. I wanted to answer this question.
Yes, please.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Ivory.
I was gonna say my motivation for presenting the story the way that I did is I thought it was something that African Americans could connect to, and then also something that non-African Americans who haven't had our experience could still connect to when you think about someone being in an abusive relationship. And so whether that's been you at one point or time or someone that you love, how traumatic and how painful and how mental it is, not just the physical part. Because I think sometimes that's something that gets missed. So we're talking about police brutality or these things that we deal with. And it's like, well, is this your everyday experience? Or, how many times have these things happened to you? And I'm like, well, if someone is getting abused, okay, let's say they didn't get hit this month. But was this a good month for them because they didn't get hit this month? If every time they came home, they were wondering, is this going to be a good week? Am I going to do something wrong? I hope I do everything right. I hope I don't do anything to make you upset. That's not a good week. That's not a good month just because something didn't go wrong. So for me, if it's the police pulling me over when I'm 17 because I'm in the wrong type of car in the wrong type of neighborhood, even though I'm just, a middle-class kid, and when my car breaks down, pushing me in the alley and leaving me there at 11 o'clock at night because I'm just a little Black girl. Who cares? Hope your parents come get you sometime soon. Well, fast forward 15 years, pulling my husband out the car for a broken taillight. So you can say, well, those aren't a lot of things. Well, this is an abusive relationship just because things aren't happening in between times. Watching other people go through some of the things you went through is still reliving that abuse. And so I thought it was something that African Americans could relate to and something that non-African Americans could see themselves more in that situation because it's a situation that maybe them or someone they know has gone through. And so when we're saying these things hurt, then maybe they could relate more to the hurt that I was talking about.
Thank you for that. Man, this has been such a rich conversation. I keep getting chills, and I would love to continue it, but I'm being pumped that we have just 5 more minutes and probably less than that now. So is there anything that's like burning on folks' heart that they need to get off right now before we close this out for now? But maybe we can talk about how we can continue that. I mean, this conversation needs to be continued, you know? I mean, I think it's happening in so many spaces and places right now, like we've all alluded to. But is there anything that anyone would like to say before we do have to leave this space and talking about the legacy of righteous anger?
I'll say, you know, it was a pleasure being on this panel. I think it's a really important conversation, to your point. I hope that if you get a chance to watch Omi or any of these films, that you walk away feeling more empowered. You know, this was a labor of love. I feel like we're all family now that we've been on this panel together. So I hope that you watch these films, share with your family and friends, and continue to support Black filmmakers.
Cool. And speaking of continuing to support Black filmmakers, can each of y'all just let folks know where they can find you, your social media handles, websites, etc. So we can just go across. Clinton.
Find the film everywhere.
It's the Sweet Rind the Film everywhere, I believe. Okay, sorry. Sweet Rind the Film. Yeah, at Sweet Rind the Film on
Cool.
Instagram.
Okay. Cool. Let's go ahead, Vatora.
My Instagram handle is Lady Vatora. I think it's in my name title here. If you want to follow us, you can go to Visual Productions on any Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Visual Productions.
Cool, thank you.
And I think Vatora just spoke for me. You can find me on Instagram, T4_book, or at Visual Productions.
Cool. And
Yep. So you can check out Freedom Inc. on Facebook or on Instagram. If you just search Freedom Inc., you'll find us. And if you're looking for me personally on Instagram, I'm it's just M Adams on Instagram.
cool. Are you on mute?
Yes, sorry. You can find the film for at Fundamental Film Series. It's in the lower third. And you can find me at Fig and Sass, FIGANDSASS on Instagram.
Thank you. Ivory, where can folks find you? Did you freeze?
You can find me on Face. Can you hear me?
Yes.
You can find me on Facebook. My page is called Love is Horribly Wonderful. And I come on there and I have a show on Monday nights at 9 on Facebook.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you all so much. This was really amazing and powerful, and just thank you for the work that you're doing and continue to do it. Thank you for the reflections you've given me. Ashe.
Thanks, Hannah.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.